diving so deep into right now, just because when the way I teach, when we go through every other chapter, we do a little bit of A and P. So, when we get to cardiology, we talk about how sodium and potassium greatly affect the heart. We talk about respiratory acidosis, alkalosis. It's going to be a little bit different. Each chapter obviously is just different things that we'll cover. We cover how shock affects the body and blood loss affects the body once we get into trauma. So, again, we're going to go ahead and dive into chapter 8. Again, don't get overly nervous if you see me skipping a few slides. Um, I'm not, like I said, your your test on this is going to be very basic, um, because I'm going to do more A&P with you as we go through everything. Um, let's see. Yeah, 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 yeah. And again, you know, as you look at this, it already tells you some of the things that this chapter covers. Again, cardiovascular we get into when we get into cardiac chapters. Endocrine we dive in deep into when we get into rest or into the metabolic stuff and diabetes. The nervous system we dive into. It's a whole chapter on its own. Uh, and I'm a big fan of respiratory. It's some of my favorite types of calls that we run in EMS. So we will hit respiratory pretty hard, and we really dive into some A and P with that. So again, if you see me skip over something in here, don't get too caught up on it. Um, what some students have done in the past is they still go through and they still make a lot of notes out of this chapter just to generally help them. Um, but some don't. So it all depends on what type of learner you are. Like I said, to me, spending a whole lot of time on this chapter just doesn't make a lot of sense. I just feel that it takes a lot of time from you. Um, when again, we're going to go over it all in the future. So when we go over things, not just this chapter, but all chapters in general, I'll start to give you guys a scenario, each class or every other class, with pertaining to something we're going to go over. And what I want you to do is I want you to start, you have it in a notebook or a piece of paper with you, because I want you to start writing the scenario down. And we'll take 2 or 3 minutes after I give you the scenario, and I want you to instantly just what your brain first goes to. I want you to write down where your thought process is on some of the things that are going on with this patient. And then at the end, we'll take a few minutes and we're going to go over the scenario. And we're going to kind of see if everybody's brain starts to head to the same direction after we get about 5, 6, maybe even 7 chapters in. Because there's a common misconception with EMS. And, especially, and I'm not knocking anybody, so please don't take it that way. But for anybody that has ever gone into St. E's Youngstown's ER at night and has dealt with Dr. Yaz the Spaz, Dr. Jadala, again, I will tell you right now, if I'm ever dying, that is the doctor that I would want. But as a care provider, it's not one that I want to deal with. Um, and when you try to give a report, a lot of the times he'll try to knock somebody or downgrade somebody because people are still under the impression that in EMS we do not diagnose, which is simply not true anymore. You know, when you get there and you have an unresponsive patient, the pupils are not are not constricted. Um, you know, vitals are somewhat stable, and then you check excuse me, the BGL, and you see that it's 48, and then you give D10, and the patient wakes up and their overall status improves. You diagnose that patient as hypoglycemic, and you fixed the problem. It's the same thing with an overdose. You get there, they're unresponsive, and they do have constricted and or however you want to word it, pinpoint pupils, snoring, respirations. They're in a hypoxic state. We give Narcan, we bag them. We probably end up starting an IV, giving another two of Narcan. They wake up. We diagnose that as an overdose. So we do diagnose in EMS, and that's kind of where I want your guys' brains to start going to, is more of the critical thinking aspect, more of the let's start looking at the things that we might be able to fix. Because you can't ever hyper focus just on one thing. You have to be able to run through a few different scenarios in your head and have a few different ideas and routes that you could go in your head, just in case, plan A doesn't work or plan A is wrong. Um, so what I want you to do, like I said, we're going to start giving these scenarios and you're going to start making the list. And I want you to think of these things right here. What organs do you suspect may have been injured? So if it's a trauma by the gunshot wounds, um, you will get a few of those scenarios with me. But what I'll also do is that shooting victim. So a scenario I gave last class was you are called for a male patient with a GSW. You arrive on scene, you find a 35-year-old male patient who is altered, lethargic, has a GSW to the lower right quadrant with an exit wound. Bleeding is minimal. Patient is hot to the touch, diaphoretic. The patient is hypotensive at 74/50. They have a heart rate of 116, and they're 91% on room air. Your assessment finds that the VGL is 402. Patient states he really didn't know if he was diabetic or not. Um, the temp was 101.2, and then I had him build off of that. And one of the questions that someone had asked about two classes later, or two sessions later, was what was the patient doing when he got shot? And they found out that the patient had not been feeling well for a few days, was driving themselves to the emergency room, and then someone was able to put all the pieces together that this patient was not only a trauma patient, but a medical patient because he was septic. He wasn't septic from the gunshot wound, he was septic from an infection he had, which is the reason he was taking himself to the hospital. Um, you know, can the patient's injuries explain the weak, rapid pulse and difficulty breathing? What mechanisms is the patient's body using to try to compensate for the effects of the injury or illness? How could the patient's injuries or illness lead to death? These are all things that I want you to think about. And you can tell that I changed those a little bit with the way that I just said them. And I did mean it the way that I said it because that's the way that I want you to start thinking. So the body consists of several layers of organization. You have chemicals, you have cells, you have tissues, organs, you have different systems, the cardiovascular system, respiratory system, neuro system, endocrine system, GIGU system, all these things. And your body's filled with a bunch of organisms. Well, what do we really know about the body? Well, we know that we always want to maintain homeostasis, right? And for those of you that forget, homeostasis it is the body's state of being. Let me see if I have to leave the office. And I do. 2510, okay.